If you want a title, it's called process. The title is process. Okay, so you should see game development process there. And yeah, we're good?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so game development process. Why are we talking about game development process? Because I want to talk about John Wooden. John Wooden is the most winningest NCAA, that's the college level basketball, the most winningest coach ever. And he won, stupid phone.
He's basketball's version of Vince Lombardi.
Correct. That's right. Actually confused them. So glad I was able to figure out it was Wooden I was talking about. Okay, so he won. He coached for 12 seasons. He won 10 of them, and 7 of them were in a row. So he knows what he's doing when it comes to coaching basketball. You see there the legacies of the greatest coach of all time, and that is not just. They don't just mean that for basketball. They mean like of all coaching. So when they went to so you sign up to this school. I forget the school because I don't care about sports. But anyway, you sign up to the school, and then you go there for your very first practice. I'm here with the greatest coach ever. And what does he teach you about? Socks. He teaches you about socks. And I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but I'm going to go through it for anyway. He teaches on the very first practice how to put your socks on. And that seems really menial and below the greatest coach of all time. But he says it's the little things that matter. It's the basic things that matter. And I don't know if you know how to put your socks on. So I'm going to teach you how to put your socks on, because if your socks aren't on right, you might get a blister. Basketball is a game that is won or lost by just a few baskets. Like the spread on a basketball game might be 6 points, which is 3 baskets. It might be 1 point, which is 1 basket. And so very razor thin margin for the win and loss. And so you might get a blister by wearing your socks wrong. And if you get a blister, you might be a little bit slower, or you might miss a game. And if you miss a game, we might have to put in a B player. And if we put in a B player, we might lose a game. And if we lose a game, we might not make the championship. And so this is all because of the socks. So there's a whole chain of events there. So he starts with the basics, right? And so that is the theme for today, is to start with the basics, and we'll build up from there. So I don't know what you don't know. So that's why we're starting with the socks. Okay, so we're going to start with software development process. I'm going to turn my light on. Okay, so we're going to talk through software development process to software developers. So it might be a little bit of school for those who went to school for this. So the very first thing I want to talk about is the waterfall approach. You like my waterfall? It's pretty nice. Okay, so the waterfall. The waterfall is important because, quite honestly, everything's built with the waterfall. Okay, we fool ourselves into thinking things are agile and they're iterative and all these things, but honestly, it's the waterfall that's making everything happen. Okay, so software development process. The software development process is called the unified process, and it came out in 1999. And the reason it came out in 1999, that was during the big .com buildup. There was a lot of people talking about how software should be made. There were various guys. There's Booch and Grady. I can't believe I remember these names. And then so these are like the gods of software development and process. And then they end up all working at IBM, and they end up all being able to like merge all of their ideas into one unified process. So up until this point, software developers were like, I follow the Booch process and I follow the Grady process and whatever. And then it all gets, the best parts of everything gets merged together into the unified process, and they hash it out and they publish in 1999, which happened to be the first year I was working in e-commerce. And the unified process is a proven process for project success. So I don't know how many software projects have been done in the world, but hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of software projects. But it's safe to say hundreds of thousands of projects have been done through the unified process of software development. So it's a very good starting point for us. So those are the 4 phases: inception, design, construction, and transition. And this presentation I'm giving you sort of comes from the one that I would give to clients at New Way Software, because I'm like, hey, you're going to give us a bunch of money. What are we going to do with it? How do you know that your $150,000 is going to be spent well? And this is the answer, because we're going to go through this process. So the first part of the process is the inception phase. And the inception phase is where we have to answer a bunch of questions. You don't leave a phase until you've answered these questions. You only do work in the phase in order to answer questions, right? You don't just work just because you should work or you feel like you should do something or whatever. You're trying to answer questions. So the first question is, what generally is the project scope? Okay, at inception, that's like the most important thing is like, what are we making here? Does the game have multiplayer? Is it all cloud-based? Are we going to, what are the platforms that we're going to be on, right? Like these are the kind of things that really matter for project scope. So we need to know what generally is the project scope. Now that's fine for an entire game, but even a feature. So narrative, okay, what is the project scope of narrative? Hey, we want to use it across multiple projects. That's a pretty important piece of scope in order to know that up front, right? Like you don't want to build it and then find out, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to throw it in this other project right now. I was like, oh, okay. Wish I would have known that up front. Once you're doing this whole phase in order to try to figure out what that project scope is. At this point, you're not committed to anything. So that's why the most important phrase or question there is, what is a way to do it? Okay, so we need to do narrative. What is a way that we can do narrative? That's all you have to have an answer for at this point. Because then once you have a way, well, we could do it this way. How long will that take? How much will that cost? In the case of where you're quoting, you can see here, there's a quote from New Way Software for $122,000 and 105. Why isn't it rounded off? Because I don't round things off. That's how much it is. And by the way, this is a little sales tip. When you give someone a number like $122,105, it doesn't look like you're just making up numbers. It looks like, oh, this guy like really thought this through. All right. It's not 122 even. It's 122,105. So anyway, there's a lot of things at New Way Software that was like, wow, these guys really care and they thought it through, and craftsmanship and whatever. And that 105 is just one example. Okay, so back to this. So how long will it take is the only question, because cost is driven by effort, right? There aren't any extra costs. I mean, maybe there's licensing costs associated with something like SpeedTree or whatever, but those really don't matter. All it comes down to is how long is it going to take. If it takes somebody 6 months in order to do this, okay, well maybe that 6 months equals $100,000. Like, okay, that's why I need to know how long will it take. From the how long will it take, then you can answer the how much will it cost. And once you know this is the general project scope, this is how long it's going to take, and this is how much it's going to cost. Once you answer those 3 things, you can do a go or no go. There is a point here that I skipped over, which is to identify the key risks. You should identify the key risks. That's one of the things you want to investigate when you're going through the inception phase. It's like, oh, this might be a problem. This might not work. Oh, we might need to upgrade our Xcode in order to do this. Or, oh, that's being depreciated. Those are the kind of things you want to raise at the beginning to know. So when the decision maker or decision makers, when they're making that decision, what do they have in front of them? Scope, how we're going to go about doing it, how long it's going to take, which therefore equals how much it's going to cost. These are the risks that we take with starting this project. And now you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, just like in Gladiator. It's all about Gladiator. Yeah. Michael.
So a question about risks then. Difference, how does that change from like just thinking about how long it's going to take? So if you're doing something and you expect that there might be an issue of Xcode, are you not factoring that into the time? Or is it just, this may be a problem? Like I feel like there's some overlap, and trying to figure out which way you go is important.
Identifying key risks is, we haven't done physics before. there's no amount of buffering or whatever that I'm going to include. I'm just telling you up front, we haven't done a physics game before. Okay, right? So that's one thing. So let's say we're doing multiplayer. Here's a risk. Team hasn't done multiplayer before. They change engines to Unreal. There's a risk. We've moved to Unreal. So you're identifying it up front so that the decision makers are fully aware of these things. Because what really upsets people is finding out after the fact. Okay, so surprises. So this is true in all sales, selling a car or whatever. Surprises. Everybody gets upset about surprises. What? You told me that blah, blah, blah. Or I thought that the electrical worked throughout the entire house. I'll tell you here, I got to this house, this townhouse that we have in Florida. I get here and the oven doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work at all. And I'm really mad at the real estate agent who did the walkthrough for us, didn't check these kinds of things. So now I have this surprise. Now I'm upset and I have to go buy a new stove. And that wasn't something I expected, right? So if the real estate agent's like, this stove looks a little questionable. It might work, it might not. I don't have time to turn it on and check. But at least knowing it up front is a lot better. So that's what we're trying to identify: risks around technology and risks around people. Those are generally the only risks, generally. So this brings a go or a no-go. And this is a situation we're in with narrative, with true play. So they're like, hey, we want to do this narrative thing. And there's a bunch of other things on the table. Like, we want to do 1.1 features. We want to do bling. There's a bunch of moving parts. So it's not like any one thing, like, hey, this thing's going to take a month. And they're like, ooh, that's too expensive. It's more like, ooh, that's going to take a month. This other thing's going to take a month. The other thing's going to take a month. We only have 2 months. I got to pick the thing, right? So that's the go, no go on any individual thing. So this is what they need to make a decision. This is what we need to make a decision. Do we even want to do this, right? Do I even want to do it? What are the risks to us? How long will it tie up one of us, right? We all know if Tyler knew what was involved with automating builds, he never would have started, right? I mean, that's just a given. He never would have tried. So, yeah, everybody hates surprises, and you want to know these things up front. Okay, so that's the inception way. So how long is the inception phase? Let's just throw out some numbers. So, at New Way Software, an inception phase is like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We hash out some things, we do some whiteboarding, we figure out some stuff. We come back with a document outlining all the stuff that I just described, answering all of these questions. Put that in front of them, and then I wait, to hear an answer. And so what am I doing right now with narrative? Trying to put this together, and we still have to have an internal meeting to talk about narrative and the implementation, see what kind of ideas come from that, and then we can put it in front of Mark and Melissa and whoever else, and get a go or no go. Okay, so that's Inception. Any questions? Any other questions on Inception before I move on? No. Okay, so the next is design. So design is where we answer a new question. It is, so previously the question was, what is a way to do this? You don't want to invest too much in it because they might come back and say, $100,000 is not worth it. And then it's canceled. So if you spent a whole bunch of time coming up with the best possible way to implement narrative, and then they're like, we're going to pass. Like, that's a big waste of time, and that really sucks and it hurts, right? So that's why you're just coming up with a way. Now we're coming up, what is the best way? Now we're really investigating all the ways of going about this, different data models, different ways of implementing. So what is the best way to do this thing? That usually requires prototyping and research investment in order to figure out what is the best way to do it. Second thing we're trying to answer is, okay, we had a general scope. We know that the project is going to include a chat feature. We know the chat feature is going to be there. Well, how exactly does the chat feature work? Does it have groups? Do you have private? Does it do text analysis? Are we filtering swear words? Can you color things? Can you put emojis in? Like, those are all really important questions that need to be answered, right? So it's great to say, hey, we're making a chat feature, and we all have used a game with chat features, so come on, like, let's just go, right? It's like, no, what exactly are we building? And you as an engineer have the right to know what exactly you're building. That is a God-given right to know what you're supposed to be building. So if it is not defined for you as to what exactly am I building, that's something you bubble up and say, what exactly do you want here? And so I know that Mark in the past has been, hey, I like working with design engineers because you guys can kind of fill in some of these blanks. And that's still going to happen. We are not going to the IBM documented to the nth degree kind of approach, but you should know exactly what you're building. Okay, next is how will it look? And you can see here, I got my cool laser pointer. So here's some balsamic mock-ups from this particular specification document. So you could put all this text on the screen. I'll tell you from my many years of dealing with clients, nobody reads this part. They just look at the pictures and then they go, oh yeah, that's what I want. And then when we go and program all this and we give it back to them and then they start playing around with it, then they're like, hey, how come it doesn't do this? It doesn't do that. And it's like, well, we never said that it would in the text part here. Oh, well, I didn't really look at that part. I just looked here and assumed that it would do A, B, and C. So you got to have the pictures. You got to know what it helps answer what exactly are we building when you answer how will it look. So wouldn't it have been great for Joel to have worked out the UI of, well, cooking, but then also have worked out the UI of Bling before you even started? That sounds pretty useful. That's why I want to push for storyboards. Like, show me the narrative. Show me what it looks like with the narrator. Show me what it looks like with two characters talking. Show me what it looks like with just one character on the screen. I want to know how it's going to look because there's implications to all these things. The next is, how does it flow? So sure, we got these a couple of screens here. That's fine. We're detailing out all this. But what is the flow? Because there's usually the golden path of hey, everything's working out the happy path, but then what about the exceptions of this? What if the player does that? So we're in the onboarding, we're showing you where to aim. What happens if they don't aim there? What does that look like, right? And so how will it flow needs to be answered. Okay, so now that we have figured out the best way to do narrative, and we know exactly what we're building for narrative, and we know how it's going to look and how it's going to flow, now how long will it take? We're not held to the first estimate because the first estimate was, there's a way to do it, but now we know exactly what we're doing. And this is a requote in a sense. So when I deal with my software clients, it's like, you're going to get, I tell them right now, why? No surprises. I tell them, you're going to get a new schedule and you're going to get a new price. Okay. So even though you said, yeah, let's go, let's make this thing for $122,000, you might get a new price. And I think my biggest jump was from $250 to $450. And the client was like beside themselves. Like, what? Like, where does an extra 200,000 come from? And the answer is from your mouth. Because every time I asked you, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? You kept saying yes. So there's a cost to every one of these features. And then we would have a giant table in there showing every single feature and the cost of every single feature, right? And then, so they look at any one feature and go, oh, this is $7,200. Look at another one. Oh, this is $6,900, whatever. And so when they look at it and it all adds up, they're like, I do want that. I do want that. I do want that. And then look at the bottom and they're like $393,000. Like, okay, I guess that's what I want because they can't pick any one thing to like toss out. So sometimes I would get into the room with the client and have to advise them. They would say, it's too much. I need to get it below this number. And I would say, well, if you took this out, you took that out, you could actually save quite a bit and stuff. And so then maybe we could get it below a number. Anyway, so now how long will it take? Now how much will it cost? Okay, and because we've done all of our planning and design, and I'll talk more about design a little later, but so we've done our design work, and now there's a new go or no go. So they may have said, yeah, let's do this. Then we figure out, okay, this is exactly how we're going to do it, and this is exactly what it's going to cost in terms of time and money. And then they're like, forget that. I don't want to do that. So that might spawn a new inception phase, right? It's like, we don't want to do it that way. We don't want to do it with that scope. Change the scope and do a new inception phase. And then maybe you're doing this multiple times as you figure it out, try to find a solution. So anyways, at this point, they give a new go and or no go. So they give a go. That brings you on to the next phase. And so the construction is where the actual work is done, and there's not really a whole lot to talk about. You just have some kind of milestone deliveries as you go along the way. So we go from these kind of rough things like, hey, this is what we're going to do, and then we go and we make it all pretty. This is one of my early prettier things that we did, right? So you go from the plan to actually making the thing. And then the last part is not terribly exciting. It's called transition, and transition is installing. In our case, it's like getting it into the app store or whatever, right? It's like the final part, and there's a bunch of work to do in order to get that. So here I would say installing the programs on servers, so that would be uploading to your app stores. We would create training documentation, support infrastructure, and just transition the project. You know, you don't just stop. There's all these things to wind it down. And so that's what the transition phase is. So the bulk of the work, which you'll see right here. So generally, the inception phase, you want to keep that short. You don't want that to be really long. So you have your short inception phase. You decide, yeah, this is worthwhile. You spend a good amount of time on your elaboration. So here we're talking, I don't know, like 10-ish, 15% of the project. This is maybe another 20, 25% of the project. So you're at kind of 40% of your entire project time is spent figuring out what the heck you're going to do. And then you just do it. And the construction part goes fast because you know what you're doing and you don't have to stop to ask questions. I mean, there's always little things along the way, but none of the big questions. Obviously, this is perfect world where you're making these plans. There aren't any pivots at this point. When did you pivot? You pivoted in inception and in elaboration phases as you were figuring things out. That's when people came up with, what if we did this, right? That, and then now basically you're on a lock, and now you're going to go run and do it. And then there's a little bit of transition at the end. Okay, so that is the waterfall approach. And like I said, that's pretty much how anything and everything is built, because the next one, Agile, everybody really loves. And really all it is mini waterfalls. So a sprint is the waterfall, right? Figuring out how am I going to do it. That's when you come up with your story points and whatever. And then you have to come up with designs, and then you actually do the thing. And then you kind of clean it up and send it out for QA or whatever is transition. So that's why I say it's the basis of everything. So Agile, purported to be a new kind of way of doing things, but not really. And the waterfall approach has iteration. The unified process has iteration within it anyway. So the manifesto for Agile software is interesting. They say we value individuals and interactions over process and tools. So we want people to have conversations and discuss things. We don't want too much documentation and things set in stone, because we believe that software gets better when you have a meeting and you reach some conclusion at the end of that meeting. So we don't want everything just defined to the nth degree. Next, we prefer working software over comprehensive documentation. What is the best spec of the software? The software is the best spec of the software, as opposed to comprehensive documentation. So you can spend a lot of time on documentation. I don't know if you guys have really experienced the levels of documentation that are possible within software development. There's a lot to go through, like a grocery gateway with a technical architect with 25 people. It could take a week in order to get a design approved before you could write any code against it. And so here they're saying, like, yeah, we're just going to start building the software and make working software as opposed to these elaborate documentations. We prefer customer collaboration over contract negotiation. That one is more easily shown later. We prefer responding to change over following a plan. That's very applicable to games. You can have the best laid plans. I mean, look at the narrative script that we had on Ava. Should have been a pivot on that earlier on. Be like, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is actually going to work, right? So responding to change rather than like, well, that was the plan. Narrative wrote it. We got to book the VO artists in order to get them recording it and whatever. We got to see this thing through. No, we should be responding to changes and things that come to light along the way, rather than just sticking to a plan. So they say in the Agile Manifesto, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Okay, so the product owner, the PO, is usually pissed off. No, the product owner is responsible for the project. So they are the one that maintain the backlog. So who's been doing that? Sort of Mark is the product owner. They ensure the highest value items are being worked on. I was in those meetings, and that's definitely Mark that's deciding those things. They understand and prioritize the needs of all stakeholders. So things would bubble up to Mark, business would talk to Mark, art would talk to Mark. So he would consider those things as he's deciding what things are going to go into sprints. Answering questions of the tech team, like feature details, right? So we would go to Mark. I think Zach went to Mark a couple days ago on something he had, right? Because that's the person to answer on this thing. And then communicate what team will work on next. And so Mark is doing that. He's saying, hey, we're going to work on Narrative, we're going to work on Bling and whatever. So clearly Mark is the product owner. Okay, so everything is defined by a story. Now this is where software development is needs-based, problem-based, whereas games are not. There is no need. You may feel like you're bored and you need to play a game, but that's not a true need. That's not a need in the sense of I need to show a signature that the thing was delivered to your door so that I can charge you correctly from the credit card company, and I don't pay 3% for credit card processing. I only pay 1.5% because I have the signature. Okay, that's a true need. That is, we have to have this. There's no way around it. This is what we need. So the way you do Agile is with stories, and a story has some user role, which is, say, finance. I am finance, and I want a signature for every single delivery so that we can reduce the Visa and MasterCard charges that the company is paying. Okay, so that is a single story that yields a contribution to the overall product. We need signature captures on these things. There might be a lot of work that goes into getting that signature capture, but that's the very simple story that would go into that. That then begs the question, like, who is your user? So I keep flipping back and forth between software and games, and hopefully keeping those lines clear. So who's your user? So when we look at games, are these people, are they reading the same books? Are they eating the same food? Are they surfing the same websites? Are they listening to the same music? So this comes to what's called customer segmentation, or personas. Persona is not just a video game. It's something that is used in business and marketing and planning. And so we use these personas in order to help guide our stories. And so we will use Peter here as a persona, and he has a particular goal that he wants to do. And so we will come up with stories for Peter, and Peter might have a lot of stories. And then when it comes to planning your product and marketing your product, you might go, you know what? It's going to cost like $50,000 to include all the things that Peter wants. Let's just cut it. Let's just cut it, because I'm not sure there's enough of a market there. I'm not sure there's enough Peters out there in order to do that. So you just say, fine, I'll just cut all the Peter stories. Bam, there's your new reduced scope. Done. And you move forward. When it comes to marketing, who do you market the thing for? Well, you already know who all these personas are that you've been building the thing towards. And so there's no guesswork. It's just, where are all the Peters in the marketplace? Oh, this is the websites they go to. These are the podcasts they listen to that we're going to advertise on. And that's how you reach them. And so we've done the same thing in Archmage Rises, and we have 5 different names: Robin, Dave, Chris, and whatever else. And so they're in different places, and we're going to reach that audience by putting things in those specific places. Okay, so here's an example, again, of some personas and talking about their goals and benefits. Okay, so the Scrum lifestyle, it's incremental development. Each version is usable. which is more or less what we've been doing, right? So that we have this kind of constant build state and you can always run the thing. You may not, well, I don't think you've ever seen it, but it is possible to have a team, 30 people, and they're all just working on their own thing and nobody's integrating with anybody else. And you just build your one feature. And then you hope at the end, all the features come together and you have a stable product. And everybody has learned everywhere that that doesn't work. It looks great on paper. They were like, hey, look, we got this giant GDD or specification document, and we're going to split it out across 40 people. And if we have 40 people each doing one feature in 6 months, we'll have 40 features done. And we're just stick it all together and it'll be great. And it's not great and it doesn't work. And so this idea of like, okay, we're branching out and then putting everything in and you have this thing that's always stable and moving forward, we found that to be the best way in order to build software. Okay, so what is the true Scrum Agile lifecycle? I don't know what this new guy, what's his name? John. I don't know what the new guy, John, how much he's going to change things. But so first thing you do is you establish your backlog. So all the bugs, all the feature requests, all the nice to haves, you shove it all into the backlog. And then you go to a sprint planning meeting. And the sprint planning meeting is where we say, okay, this is the capacity that we have for this sprint, for this 2-week period. These are the 4 things that we think we can get done in that particular time. It's reasonable in order to get done. So those are the 4 things that we're going to actually go in place in the sprint. I was at the sprint planning meetings halfway through working on Ava. The first half, I wasn't even at the sprint planning meetings. So they just took things and put them into the sprint. And I don't know why that was. I don't know if they don't know how to do a sprint planning or whatever, but anyways, that's what happened. So eventually I got to the sprint planning meetings, and but the sprint goals were already determined. It was like, we have to release on December 15th, and we have to have these 12 levels, and we have to have this, and we have to have this. And so it was just all the have to haves broken out over 8 sprints or whatever it was. And so there wasn't that evaluation part. I think this is what people were talking about in the retrospective. There wasn't that evaluation of how long will this thing actually take to make? And maybe we can't get all those things into this particular sprint. And then that means for the next following sprint, we're not going to be able to get all those things. And then it has this cascade effect. So the sprint planning meeting, the sprint planning that I was going to, I think that meeting was about 45 minutes to hour tops. Sprint planning should be in the 3 to 4 hour range in order to really have real answers for this is what we're actually capable of doing. And is way, way easier when you actually have an inception and a design, right? If you have both those things, it's a lot easier to do the sprint planning because you've already thought it through. So doing inception work and design work should be part of the sprints, right? So it's like, hey, we want narrative. Create a task or a story for inception of narrative. Great. Okay, now next sprint, create another story for design of narrative. Great. Okay, now that's done. And now we're actually going to do it. Now is the actual construction tasks for doing narrative. Okay, so you did your sprint planning, and then you actually run the sprint, and then you review your sprint. And you're like, okay, well, that when we review the sprint, it's not just like, hey, these are the things we got done, these are the things we didn't get done, but actually looking at the things that we did get done and say, is it good? Is it good? Does it meet the quality? Are we happy with it? If the answer is no, it goes back on the backlog, right? So we're like, got to do that again, got to work on it more in order to get it right. So you throw it back onto the backlog, and then it may not go into the next sprint. Again, that's up to sprint planning. Do we take that thing from last sprint that's not quite right and put it in again? Or we just leave it there and go, whatever. We got to get these new features in, but it needs to be a conscious choice. Okay, any questions on this? No. Yeah.
Well, just like, are we actually going to do some of the stuff? Like I'm aware of some of these things from like school, but I have yet to work in a place where we've done any of these things. And there's bits and pieces here and there. But like, I mean, with our current stuff, we're being asked to evaluate our tasks once we've already gone into the sprint. which seems like data you need to plan for it. And I don't know.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do on narrative, right? It begins with narrative, and we should be doing this. And so when John is talking with Melissa, going, "You're doing what now?" I don't want him to think that and say that, right? Because the implication is we're complicit in poor sprint planning and poor sprint form. We're complicit in that. So it makes us look like we're dumb and we don't know how to do a sprint. And then you're going to say, "Yeah, well, I was working on Archmage and we weren't doing this either." Are you going to say that?
I can say that if you'd like. I mean, yeah. Most of the time I just get a task where it's down to, hey, I need this thing fixed. But in some ways I'm doing that from the full inception to design step as well, but also just, oh, this thing's broken. So there's no notion of, hey, here's a thing I'm going to do in the future. There's only, is this thing more important than what I'm currently doing? Which is a reevaluation, which no one ever has time to do. So it's just whatever was convenient.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did not follow strict sprints. We would work on things, and some of the things, for instance, Daniel would work on something and it would be done like really quick, and you would work on something and it would be 6 weeks, right? So it would be like 3 sprints worth. And so we said in the retrospective that true play forces us to kind of up our game, or we learned a lot by working with them. One of the things in the back of my mind is like, how would we use Jira and sprint planning for finishing Archmage? Because there's going to come a point where I have to be very rigid about how Archmage gets finished. It's been pretty loosey-goosey along the way, because a lot of that is figuring things out. Like, you worked on the dungeon algorithms and decorating the rooms and stuff, and we don't know how long that is going to take. And so what does the sprint look like? One task, figure out how to do dungeon room, and then the next sprint, figure out how to do dungeon room, the next sprint, figure out how to do dungeon room. And that's why I spent 6 months completing the Inception work on Archmage, so that here's a way that we can implement these features that we've promised. There is a way, and we can start to do that.
That does beg a question. What is a standard sprint? Like, true play is like 2 weeks. I've heard of 1 week sprints or
2 weeks.
Whatever. 2 weeks?
Yeah. I've never heard of anybody using 1 week. It's possible. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can do months, or you can do whatever. But the industry seems to have landed, and I say industry, software industry, games seems to have landed on 2 week sprints. Whatever stress there is involved with ending a sprint, nobody wants that every week, even if it's small. Even if it's small. I don't know how you guys feel, but when we start a new sprint, I'm just like, oh, good, we don't have to finish this by the end of this week. So, yeah, that's usually the way it is. So Scrum is a way of doing Agile. And so you have these things on the backlog, you move them into to-do, and then obviously in progress, then you evaluate them. And you evaluate them to see if they should go back onto the backlog or not. That's what the evaluation is supposed to be. What did we experience in Ava? Anything that went to dev done just got approved. Because we had so many things to do. Very rarely did something go back and need to be like redone. That's essentially what we're doing now with the narrative, right? Is like, we just heads down, finish the narrative, and now we're doing the evaluation part and going, actually, that's not really hitting the mark. Now we got to go redo it. So it goes onto the backlog, and now we're doing that. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say about that. So designs of sprints. Sprint is a short time box period when a Scrum team works to complete a set amount of work. Have you guys found any lies in that working on Ava?
Yes. It's not a set amount of work. Yeah, I mean, I don't see Ava as a good example of it. So uh, nothing really, not much seemed to apply except for that we said something was a sprint.
Yeah, we called it a sprint, but it wasn't. So a sprint is short, time boxed period. We did that. Short, 2 weeks. It was time boxed. The 2 weeks was 2 weeks.
Except finishing the work in that time was not normally what we actually ended up doing. So many sprint tests were multi-week processes. Anyway.
I didn't get to that part.
Okay.
It was a short time box period. The sprint was always 2 weeks. They were never 2 weeks and 3 days or 1 week and 2 days. They were always 2 weeks. So we got that part right. Where Scrum Chain works to complete, we completed some things, a set amount of work. We never had a set amount of work. And that's the big fall down part of the sprint planning, was they were not locked. It's usually the term we use. They weren't sprint locked. Sprint locked is I took it from the backlog, I put it into a sprint. And you see the way Jira works. I don't know how much you've used Jira. I had to use it a ton. Once you assign something to a sprint and the sprint's already started, it pops up and says, are you sure you want to change the scope of the sprint? Because that is so abnormal behavior to do that. You're not supposed to do that ever at all, right? So that's why it pops up every single time I would do it. It'd be like, shut up, I want to go to Codex. So it's the set amount of work. And so when somebody said, like, it felt like the goalposts were always moving, it's because we didn't have the set amount of work in order to get done. Now, when it comes to things like automated build scripts, nobody thought it would take that long. How long does it take in order to update the physics? We updated the physics twice. It's hard to know. So you are going to have those like moving goalpost things where it's like, oh, it was a set amount of work. I had 4 days to do this thing and it ended up taking me 8 or 12 or whatever. Like that still happens. But we were adding and removing things from the sprint all the time. I would be adding and removing things from the sprint even on a Thursday. It's my
we were doing that for a reason, though, or I assume. Like it wasn't just like, hey, we're breaking this because we don't want to do sprint stuff. It was, I mean, it seemed intentional to make it so that we felt reactive to the level designers and to others. And I mean, part of it because we didn't have the planning. But if we were to go to actually doing a set amount of work, are we like boxing in time to say, hey, we're going to have this amount of time set apart in a sprint just to respond to designers or to add in quick little bug fixes that someone's running into? Because there's a lot of stuff that pops up and we're like, I can't wait until next sprint to add that in. Like, what would be the process in, or is that just something where we say, yeah, we have to get buy-in from TruePlay to say, yeah, we will handle that next sprint. Like for big features, that makes sense, but for smaller stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two answers to that. So one is whatever you can put off to the next sprint. Like if we get into a habit, right, a culture of sprint lock, then everybody knows, like, you don't mess with the sprint, because when you mess with the sprint, then things, start to fall apart and whatever, right? So that's first thing, kind of cultural thing. The second thing is, that's why your estimates are so important. That's why I asked for the estimates. And I believe to date, I only have one person's time logs. Sorry, when I say I asked for your estimates, I asked for your time logs. And I think I only got Michael's with the summary detail thing that I was looking for. So when my expectation is that when you're working on something, and let's say you're working on the physics thing and it took you 44 hours, that 44 hours includes being interrupted by other team members and asking you questions, right? You just leave the timer going. Because if you're stopping the timer and starting a new timer for answering Tyler a question and then stopping the Tyler timer and then going back to the thing, that is not useful. I want to know how long the thing actually took. including the interruptions, so that when we're planning our sprints, we are planning with time estimates that include interruptions.
So like by interruptions, you mean like we have a meeting, like for example, this
Yeah.
hour-long meeting we have, you want that included within the time estimates and stuff
Yes.
like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So whatever task you're working on, this would be inclusive of that. So you have to go to stand up. I don't care how long you spend in a tree play stand up. I care how long the task took, and the fact that you had to go off for 20 minutes to a true play stand up while working on that task. That's the kind of interruption or whatever that needs to be like baked into it, right? And so we need to have uniformity on how we're tracking these things. And I'm sure people are saying, well, you never told me that before. And so anyways, this is why we do CodeCraft, so we can have uniformity on how we treat these things. And so I only care about how long you spend on a task. So I believe people are putting our stand-ups in the morning as a separate thing, stand up in the morning. Now, those are only 20 minutes. Everybody knows that. So, or at least Zach knows that. So that's something that's easy to accommodate for when you're like, okay, well, there's 20 minutes and times 5 days, that's 100 minutes. Fine, it's an hour and a half. And we just kind of like know that that's there. It's the more of the, oh, I had to jump out. I had to help Ruby with something because she was trying to do something with her shader that wasn't quite working. And I need to explain that and whatever. Like those are the parts that are unknown. And so doing that kind of interrupted work, there's no value after the fact to seeing that separated out. You know, I had to help Ruby 14 times over the last 2 weeks, and in total it was 72 minutes. What am I going to do with that? I'm not going to plan Ruby interruption tasks of 72 minutes for every sprint, right? Like it's just, it could be anywhere from 0 to 1,000. That part's not useful. So track the real answer is track your JIRAs is the real answer. The only thing that you're working on is your JIRA. The fact that you're in a stand-up, that you're in this right now, that you're at lunch or whatever, all my lunches are part of a task because there's no value. I mean, maybe there's a personal interest to see how many hundreds of hours did I spend at lunch in 2021. But beyond that, there's no business need to know the lunches. All that matters is I was working on physics and it took me 402 hours in order to finish the physics engine. Great, that's valuable. Now we come across something that is we feel of similar complexity, similar scope, and we go, okay, well, we know that took 402 hours. So maybe that's what this will take as well.
So just to clarify, we really are changing how we do toggle then, because I don't know if anyone has been doing it that way. Like I know I track toggle or stand up and lunch, and we'll occasionally swap out to here. I'm doing some bug fixing or something else. But
yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go to purely the main task, even if it's not what you're really working on.
Yep.
Okay. So like I'm toggling. I mean, yes, I'm toggling tracking CodeCraft, but I should probably just be tracking Ava accomplishments.
Yeah.
Right now.
Nope. I'm working on addressables right now.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think you see the logic in that, right?
It was
interruptions
at
are
first
a part of the estimation.
So for me, it was almost counterintuitive for a second there because I want to see everything that's taking my time up. But then again, if we're involved, we're only interested in this one task. Tracking that, because that is what I'm truly working on. Even if I get interrupted, if I have to get up to the bathroom, if I need to grab a snack or something, it's all involved in that because that's what I'm focused on. So then redirecting my thought in that regards, it does make sense.
A more detailed, like of all the interruptions and stuff makes sense to me for like trying to optimize my time. But from a corporate standpoint, I see no value in, oh yeah, it's this thing and that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess almost view toggle as for myself. So, but it makes sense to view it the other way because I want to make sure I'm not taking too much time for lunch. So I use toggle and yay, okay, I'm within the time range. I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so as you know, it's 2 weeks.
I did have a question about that session or section, if that's okay. So if we have a set amount of work, then that implies that it's completable, right?
Yeah.
And if it's a set amount of time, what if we really kill it and we overestimate how long things are going to take or whatever, what have you, and we finish a couple days early? So then do you go on to extra credit, or like how do you fill in that time?
You read a book until the sprint is over. That's not the answer. Yeah, so great. We got ahead on that one. Cool. You know, there's an interesting thing about human beings and guessing, and I'm sure you've heard this, that any individual person sucks at guessing, but the aggregate of humanity is actually really good at guessing. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't. So if you have the jelly beans thing, and you put like, you know, 4,000 or something jelly beans inside this container, you stick it out there and you say, guess how many jelly beans there are. And some people come along and say 100, and somebody else will come along and say 1,000,000 and whatever. But you get all these guesses. And so any one person could be like really, really off. But when you get the aggregate, I forget what the number is, but once you get past 50 guesses, or it's like 35, 50 guesses, once you get past that, you actually have almost exactly the number. Right? So you take the median of the 35 guesses, and that's actually ends up always being the number. Guessing someone's weight, guessing how many dentists are in New York City, whatever. So we're really good at crowdsourcing guessing. So how does that apply to this? So the idea is that you're going to be wrong under on things. You're going to be wrong over on things. Your software developer probably lean on the over or underestimating side of things, right? You're optimistic usually. I've only met a few, almost actually Mark Gantz is somebody that I would put in the category of someone who probably always overestimates how long something will take. There's another guy, Glenn, that I worked with that would be like, that's gonna take 2 weeks, and then he ends up doing it in 1 week or something. But then there's pretty much the 99% that where we're always underestimating how long it's going to take. So the first thing is, hopefully you have enough different tasks that across the multiple guesses, maybe you actually get something that's realistic in the median, maybe. But since we're leaning towards underestimating, maybe when it comes to planning out a sprint, we're not planning out 10 days of effort in a sprint. We're planning out 8 days of effort into a sprint, knowing that there's that thing. So that's something to be learned, like by me working with you, Zach. Like I start to learn kind of what your variability is versus somebody else's. But the answer is, if you do it and you get your thing done early, that's fantastic. There's things on the backlog that we can bring in. That's the really short version. So it was completing a set amount of work, and you did. And then I guess you called it extra credit. I thought you meant the videos, but
No.
yeah. So you get the extra credit, and you pull that stuff in, and it makes the project better for everybody.
Now, what about the flip side? So we schedule poorly, and there's more work when it can't be accomplished, or if stuff comes up. How do we resolve that situation?
Yeah. So Fred Brooks says you just work late, and you just work all the time until you get your work done. Kidding. That's not what he said. Has anybody actually read Mythical Man Month?
I'm in the process of reading it. I just got it.
Oh, okay. Wow. I will, for at least a while, be able to make up whatever I want that Fred Brooks said until Raul finishes the book and can.
And then I'm going to fact check you.
And start fact checking. That's right. Yeah. So the answer is that. Okay, so the real official answer is that you work to the end of that task and you complete as much of that task as you possibly can, and then a new task is created for the additional work. It's not the same task that gets bounced. It's a new task with a new estimate. So your original task may have been, let's say, 10 days, and then you have a new one, which is for 2 days to finish off the thing that you didn't finish. And and that's it. So that's kind of how they handle the set amount of work, and it ends up going long.
Another question on the tasks. So are we doing it to a specific task or to a task category? So for example, I've done a lot of stuff on movement and getting that working in Maple. Do I end up having a task that is MPL 113 underscore movement on slopes, MPL 432 movement on treadmills? I hope we don't do that. But anyway, actually, that wouldn't be that bad. Anyway, or do I just go, these are all movement, movement, movement as I'm doing the different Jira tasks?
Yeah. So the you're talking about the time tracking, or you're talking about the sprint planning?
I'm talking about the time tracking, which I guess is a separate issue.
Yeah. So the time tracking, I would put to the movement thing. The fact that there's certain niceties about breaking out the bugs. So for instance, like you have a very specific and precise bug, and maybe it's only 5 minutes to fix because you just had to change some text on a screen or something. So it's like this bug. And then, so you end up with these time logs that are like 30 long because you had all these like individual things. From a time log perspective, from a company perspective, it's the 8 hours spent on bug fixing is the most important thing, not any one individual bug. Although in the case of a bug, sometimes like Mike Dameron might really want to know how long each bug actually took, because he's looking at the aggregate and going, okay, so if the median time on a bug is 1.2 hours and we have 1,000 bugs and we have 1,200 hours of work, still in the hopper, right? Like he wants to know from that perspective. So that would be something that would be in Jira of like how long that actual thing took. But again, for planning purposes, it's like, yeah, you're working on bugs. Kind of what we did. That's what we said. Yeah, we're working on bugs.
It seems nice to have that cycle of looking at, hey, we estimated this task at being this much, and then it actually took this long. And so if we're clumping like tasks together, so bugs or movement or whatever, you lose that direct feedback. I know Toggle has support for like tags and stuff. Like if we want to tag bugs with a separate tag, so we have the actual bug task and then a tag, maybe that gets us both what we want, because then we can have that immediate feedback to get better estimation, which seems valuable.
Yes.
On top of conglomerate data stuff.
That is the only way to get better at estimation, is to say you'll do something in 8 hours and then realize you took 12. That's it. Like that moment of what? That's how you get better at it. So the goal should be that when you're giving it a task, that it is broad enough that it matches the time tracking thing. I know that's not always the case, but that should be the case in general. So you should be assigned a task of movement, which then has subtasks of movement on a slope and moving on a ledge and movement with, underwater and whatever. That's really the way that should go. I'm not a fan of the subtask feature in Jira, so I just tend to have separate tasks. Okay. Okay, so 2-week sprint. So there's 2 per month, and a year has 24 of them. No, 26 of them. Well, I guess roughly it's 24. And then you do enough of those, and then you get a game of the year. So there you go. That's how you make games. That's right. It's simple. We're overcomplicating it. Okay, how do you do a sprint stand-up? Work done yesterday, work to be done today, any impediments. And you see that in our stand-ups that we do. And you don't see that in the true play stand-ups, which is why I don't call them real stand-ups. Now, when you get to, I don't know, the 25 people or whatever that are in a stand-up, the work done yesterday and the work to be done today really doesn't matter to most of the people there. There's Mark who cares, Melissa who cares because Mark cares, and then it really starts to drop off a cliff as to who cares. So that's why you see me writing out the work done yesterday, work to be done today, right? Why do I write that out? So that nobody has to listen to that. in a proper stand-up. And so that's become part of the culture at TruePlay. You can thank yours truly, so that we don't have to do that part, and we can just do the any impediments. And we, you see that we can also add celebrations. Is there anything to celebrate, something you're particularly proud of or whatever, those kind of things. But it is not a place for announcements. And I need to tell Melissa that more. It's not the place for announcements about security training that you all have to do and talk to your leads. One of the things about our stand-up that poor Zach is waking up early to attend is because it at least is that one touch point per day with the rest of the team where you get to see everybody. This is the rare occasion where we all get to see each other again. So there's this other kind of intrinsic value to the stand-up that so when it goes past 20 minutes, I don't really care, because it's the time for the team to gel and maybe talk about Warhammer Total War a little bit, as needed. So that's why I haven't been much of a Nazi on the sprint meeting time thing. But if it goes too far, and it's not me that's making it go too far, then I'll crack down on it. Then that's when you say, well, what if you're the one making it take too long? I'm like, bring it up in the review. Or talk to me afterwards privately. Or if you really believe in Defiance's principles, then call it out in the middle of the meeting. There's no better honesty than that of a little kid that just goes, you smell funny, right? Like the little kid doesn't care. And so the truth of a little kid, right? You say, you talk too much. That was in the Jerry Maguire movie. That was funny. Okay. So sprint retrospective, the feedback goes into the backlog. What that means is you're looking at the sprint that just finished, and you're looking at the tasks and saying, hey, this wasn't good enough, or this didn't hit the goal, or we need to change the goal on this, and it goes like right back into the backlog. So that's what that's for. Skip that. Okay, so the typical AAA approach to making a video game is this is time, right? So on this axis is time. Oh yeah, that's labeled on there, right? And this axis is resources. So typical AAA is not very many people for not very long decide what the game is. And then they hire a whole bunch of people or allocate a whole bunch of people that already work for them to go, and everybody just works on the thing and blah. And if you have read the Press Reset and Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, you will read chapter after chapter, case study after case study of this, and talk to Mark and Melissa, and they will always tell you there is never enough pre-production, and nobody fixes it. And I don't know why nobody fixes it. They just don't fix it. It doesn't make any sense to me that nobody fixes that. Okay, so that's typical AAA. Here's the typical indie approach, which is pre-production was that. I just want to make my game, right? Raul shaking his head because it's fun to make the game. That's what I want to do. And so you just make the game. That's all there is. You may have thought about it on the bus a little bit, but other than that, you're just making the game, okay? So they're both pretty
Should
good.
we laugh or cry right now?
Yeah, so, so Mark Cerny is one of the smartest people around.
Thomas?
Yeah?
I want to interject really quickly. As I'm reading Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks,
yes,
he makes a point to talk about software development process versus the two guys that are working in their garage making a program. And he shows a little graph, right, about what the program is, the product, the system, and then the product system, right? And he's like, the two guys in their garage, they're just making this.
yeah,
That's all they're doing, and that's all they care about. What everybody else is doing is this, and this. And that's precisely what's happening between the AAA approach and the indie approach. The indie approach usually just cares about the program, the game, right? And then the AAA guy is thinking about the game, the business, the team, the system, and then how all this comes together.
Yeah, that's exactly why you have to go slow to go fast. I think he's also in that part talking about productizing something costs 4 times as much. You can correct me on what the number is, something like that. Is it 4?
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. So productizing is, okay, do this thing. Then somebody's saying, do this thing so that I can reuse it somewhere else. And that costs 4 times as much. And that's the part you have to be aware of. So do this thing and make it so that I can change my mind later about what exactly it does, right? Give me sliders or whatever. That's productizing something. So the rule of thumb is it takes 4 times longer from making a thing to making a thing with an editor that you can modify things, or that you can take it and plug it into another project, and et cetera, right? Okay. So Mark Cerny, a little quote about him is, he's the closest we have to a modern day Da Vinci. I didn't say that about him, but somebody important did. So he started in the games industry at 17, working at Atari in 1982, and he released his first coin-op game called Marble Madness, which was very successful. Then he worked at Sega on the Sega Master System and the launch of the Sega Genesis. Then he was integral to working on Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which was made in the US, not in Japan. The original one was made in Japan. Then he was VP and then president of Universal Studios game division. So he's the guy that ended up hiring Insomniac and making Insomniac. He's the guy that chose TT Games that makes all the Lego things. He worked with Naughty Dog on Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, and the first Uncharted. He's worked with Insomniac on Spyro, Ratchet and Clank, and Resistance. He got a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2004 at the age of 40. Makes me feel bad. And he's fluent in Japanese and one of the foremost Western experts on the Japanese game market. He's the lead designer of the PS4 and the Vita, executive producer of Spider-Man for the PS4, and lead designer on the PS5. Does anybody want to hear what he has to say?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. So he says, and I really believe, because I've been through a lot of software development and process, and I understand all these things, and I remember one of the first things I did when I got into games was they had Agile for Games. There's a guy that wrote a book, Agile for Games. I was like, I gotta read that. And I read it, and I was like, he's not doing Agile, he's doing Waterfall, the whole book, published by O'Reilly with the nice front cover and the thick hardcover, whatever, and they're just doing Waterfall. Anyway. So Mark Cerny says you find and capture the lightning and then build a product around that. So your project will not miraculously get better during production. That's a key phrase from him. It doesn't miraculously get better during production. If it sucks at pre-production, it will suck as you get to the end of production. Once you find the fun, then you hit full production. So it's kind of like, when he says that you go into production, it's kind of the idea of making a mod or an expansion pack to a game, right? So like Civilization 6 already exists. There it is. And now you're like, I'm going to take this Civilization 6 and I'm going to make Lord of the Rings version of it, right? Like I already have this solid foundation, and now I'm just really going to focus on making it like fun and expansive and all these things. So that's what he's saying is how game development is supposed to be. You're supposed to figure out with a small team what is the core fun, lightning in a bottle part. And now that you have that solid and you've made your vertical slice and you have your one level, and he says that one level, if you have a budget for your game of $2 million, your first level will cost you $1 million. And when he said that at DICE, there were gasps, audible gasps in the audience when he said that. Because what he says is you need to spend 50% of your resources or 50% of your money and 50% of your time that you're allocated on pre-production. That's what you have to do. And then you find the fun. And did we do that on Ava? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We just, I made a little thing and I was like, yeah, this is pretty fun. Like I can throw these things at it, whatever. And really great because next week we got 2 level designers showing up and they need to start making levels for this thing. And I'm like, it's not ready. And they're like, well, they're coming anyway. And I don't have anything else for them to do. That's AAA, right? It's just you hire someone and you just give them work and off you go. And so India is more agile and you usually don't hire someone that you don't need. And usually, so the Mark Cerny method, or just called the Cerny method, is 50% pre-production and 50% production. So in 2000, he says, it's going to cost you $1 million in order to go through your pre-production. Are you really prepared for that? The first 5 levels that you make for your games, again, coming from a game that has levels, Mario, Sonic, Ratchet and Clank, Uncharted, your first 5 levels you make will suck because you're just getting your feet wet. But by the end of making 5 levels, you'll have 1 good level, right? The 6th level will be 1 good level. And now that you have your 1 good level, that's what you turn into your vertical slice and your overall bar quality that you want to hit. So you take your 1 level, throw away the other 4 or 5, and polish that thing up. And you put in the narrative, and you put in the sound, and you put in the music, and you put in the controls, and you put in the visual effects and the tech art and whatever. And now you know how much it costs to make a level, right? Now you know. And this is the thing that I've seen Adam say and complain about. And part of the reason why he got his way was he's like, I don't yet know how much it costs to make a level, to art a level. So you can't ask me for estimates and resource estimates and whatever, because I don't know what 1 costs. And therefore, you can tell me you need 1,000 levels or 5 levels. I don't know the answer. And so the vertical slice is the most important thing. You experiment with everything you could possibly experiment with when you're doing this pre-production. You work cheap and fast. Get tons of work will be thrown out, so you work as fast as possible. It's trial and error prototyping. There is no such thing as a stench of failure when you're going in your pre-production thing. You're prototyping and experimenting. You grab things off the shelf as much as possible. Oh, I need trees. Great. I'll grab speed tree and throw it in. Oh, I need a UI. Great. I'll pull something off the asset store and throw it in. None of it matters because you're trying to find the lightning in the bottle, right? And you want to go as fast as possible. There's a big term thrown around, MVP, minimum viable product, which comes from lean startup, which the whole business world got excited about. It's good. It's not great. It's not that new, but anyway. So everybody's all excited about minimum viable product and failing fast and such. And Cerny talked about that in 2000, way before any of these books came out, you want to move as fast as possible so that the things you're throwing out didn't cost you very much in order to throw it out. I remember we were watching the No Clip documentary on the Thief series, and they were just talking about how much work they had to throw. There were like 8 months of work had to be thrown out because we realized A, B, and C. Well, should have figured it out here, right? That's the real answer, is you figure it out here. That's why, there's gray boxing and such in order to figure things out. So we have learned some things along the way, but still, we don't seem to be taking these lessons truly to heart. And so I would think Mark, Melissa, others, they should know that they're doing things wrong at AAA, and yet it's kind of like, well, you end up parenting your kids the way you were parented because you just don't know any other way. You're like faced with like, I don't know what to do, so I'll just do what I see other people doing. And so it takes discipline in order to do this approach. So this is why I've talked about the 1 year game, and the 1 year game is 6 months of this and then 6 months of this, and that's the 1 year game. Finally, Mark Cerny says, you don't know you have fun until you have your hands on the controller. And so Mark says that about, like, I have to play it on the phone, I have to play it on the phone, I have to play it on the phone. He's really honest about game dev, and he says game design documents are a waste of resources. and focus tests are completely useless. And the reason he says that is when you do focus tests, this is more like trivia, this isn't core to CodeCraft, but he says that when you do focus tests, what do you learn? You learn the things that you already knew ahead of time. And within 10 minutes of the focus test, you'll find out what's popular, because the most vocal person will say something. Other people start nodding their heads going, yeah, I agree with that. And then, so all you find out is the popular opinion of the group. You don't necessarily get true results. So never listen to what people say, watch what they do. Just watch what they do. And then you can, that's a true focus test. And then I was just telling my students last night when they were asking me about focus testing, and I was like, yeah, so this rise of the streamer is fantastic boon for game development, because now you're getting somebody who talks through their thinking process and you can see what they do. So when they're silent, like when they're not doing anything on the screen, they're talking through their thought process, which is very hard to get people to do. So you kind of like understand what they're thinking about, and then you watch what they do. You don't listen to what they say afterwards. Oh, I had fun in this part, or I really like this, or I didn't like that. You just watch what they do, how much time they spend on things. And so we can take our game and put it in front of small streamers who record it, or fans who record themselves. I've done that before, where the fan will play the game, record themselves, and send it up to us, and then we can see. And they were having way more fun than I expected them to have, which was shocking to me. So anyways, that's more of what he says. Okay, so Resident Evil 4 was a game that was very popular, and they're like, okay, we want to make, Capcom is like, okay, we want to make a sequel to this thing. And they were messing around with the code and code base and the features of Resident Evil. And they started prototyping and trying different things. And like Cerny said, everything's on the table. So what do? They just put in a third-person character that can jump really high. And then when you're in the air, like, hey, why don't I shoot things? And when I'm shooting, I actually stay in the air. How that works, nobody knows. But anyway, I'm going to try these things. And they ended up going way off the rails of what a Resident Evil experience was. And they created Devil May Cry. So they ended up getting an entirely new franchise just by doing this prototyping, try everything, look for lightning in a bottle. They just kept doing things. They're like, this feels good. This is fun. Those that watched the Rocket League documentary, it was like, they were like, this is fun. Like, I get that nobody else on the planet understands why you want to play soccer with cars, but this is fun. And we're just going to keep going and putting in more fun things. And that's how Devil May Cry came to be. So it does work. And okay. I'm not sure that's important. Okay, so in preparing for battle, I was always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable, and that's what Dwight D. Eisenhower said. So why do we go through the Inception design phase is to think things through, to think it out, and to plan well for what we're going to be making, what we're going to be programming. Does it end up, does the source code at the end look the same as what you planned out ahead of time? No, it does not. But that doesn't mean the planning was a waste, right? The planning helped you to get to that source code that you actually ended up doing that solved your problems. But what does this planning mean? This is going a bit to Josh's question earlier in the week. What does this mean when you talk about doing design? So I want to show you what I mean when I talk about doing software design. And I'm going to give you two examples, one from a program called Star UML and one from Visual Studio. And it's probably going to take 20 more minutes. Does anybody need to take a break right now? Go to the bathroom?
Yeah, I need to go quick.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
No problem. Just going to get set up here.
5-minute break. Right back.
Yeah.
Me as well. Also.
Read that. Oh, good. We're still recording. Okay. I'm using my phone as a second screen, and it's like so tiny. I can't read the text on the big red button. I thought it said stop sharing, but I didn't know until I clicked it. So the recording is still going. That's good. Resume the recording. So Michael was asking, like, are we really going to do this, or are we just going to talk about these nice things that, you know, this is how things should be done, and then we go back to not doing how things should be done. So in a true play client situation, they are saying, how should we work? They're asking, how should we work? And so I'm sharing this with everybody so that we all internally know how we should work, and we can all take the steps to work this way. And that means calling things out, right? And so let's imagine that you have somebody who's really a stickler for, no, we're working this way. You have somebody else who just doesn't know or doesn't care. And so when the client asks for something and they pipe up in the meeting like, yeah, we'll take care of that. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out as we go, right? Like we're undermining each other. So I'm starting with the socks of getting everybody understands how to put their socks on. We all have the same basic knowledge. And now we can implement this. And so when we see those situations where we're veering off into, you know, going the old way, the bad way, the not actually following these things, that is, we now have an opportunity for that, whereas maybe I was the only gatekeeper on that. So there's an accountability that comes from me sharing this stuff with you. It's like, hey, Tom, you should tell us all those wonderful things, and then you never did it. That's a legitimate thing to call out, right? And we want to get there. So there's this great story that Dr. McGee gives, Dr. J. Vernon McGee from Through the Bible. I love him and his program, and I love this little story. And so the mom says to the little boy, you're in trouble, go and sit down in the chair. And he's standing up and won't sit down in the chair. And she's like, you better sit down in that chair or things are going to get worse. And he's like, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to stand. And then she finally goes over because he's a little boy, and she like puts him down into the chair and sits him down in the chair. And he says to his mom, I'm still standing up on the inside. So that's how we need to be with the client, right? So even when the client is like pressuring and saying like, okay, just do this quickly, you only have this much time or whatever, that we're still standing up on the inside, that we are still going to plan and design and do these phases, even if the client is not allowing us to do or whatever. And how do we do that? By delivering less in that sense, right? Like by doing it properly and delivering less. That was one of the things that came out of the retrospective was, yeah, we delivered a lot of stuff, but a lot of it's crap. and we have to program around the crap now, and it's like even worse, right? That's the cost of speed, right? And so they know that, right? I sent that to them today, right? So they're aware of it. And so I would say true play is in a time of repentance right now. Now, whether it actually takes hold and they actually change their ways, I don't know, but we can coach them and coax them into changing their ways. And I can bring it up in a meeting, but I'm not in every meeting. Sometimes the meeting's just Zach and Mark, right? And so if they keep hearing from us, I need to plan that. I need to think that through. That's what Mark Gantz is saying. And they're giving him the time for it. I don't understand that, right? And Mark and Melissa are like, how come he gets all the time he needs and we don't? Anyway, so, you know, I talked about changes in this new year. Here we are doing CodeCraft, and I am committed. I'm standing up on the inside that we're going to make these changes because I'm not interested in working the other way. I did it because it snuck up on me, and we had to deliver. And so I did it because I had to, but I was miserable doing it. And so when we have a new project, like the action game we spoke of, that none of us will tell Zach what I'm talking about. So when we go to make that next new title, I really do believe in the Cerny method. I believe in the Cerny method because I've done everything else and it doesn't work. So I really believe in the Cerny method. I know from Archmage, I should have written that spec initially and figured out what the thing was. I had a prototype and I started, hey, this prototype's good. I tried it on some people. I got feedback. I did focus group testing and such. Like, I didn't just blindly go ahead because I wanted to make the thing. I thought I had done enough pre-production, but now I know that I didn't. And so, yeah, I'm going to try better the next time to give enough pre-production to the thing. And so that's why I say 6 months of trying out stuff and whatever, and maybe we end up with Devil May Cry, which is not where we started from or what we were even trying to achieve. But hey, this is pretty good. And then we end up going and doing that. So that's why the kind of 6 months and 6 months is what I'm trying to do.
I guess the corollary would be, what is actually actionable for us, like for true play? So like, we can't do the Cerny method and be like, all right, so we're not even finished with pre-production yet. Let's find the lightning in the bottle. It seems like we've moved into production and we're like, here's the game we're making. We can still do sprints. We can still do some agile processes. I'm just trying to think through, like, if we can get true play to do everything we want, what does that look like? Or how do we step towards that goal?
Yeah, honestly, the way that true play should work is one programmer and one designer just shut the door on them for 3 months and see what they come back with. That's really, like, that's the Cerny method, right? Just a tiny team. Star Fox for the SNES was made this way. Just like, there's like 2 guys at Rare locked away in Nintendo that occasionally spoke to Miyamoto, just working on this thing. And then you end up getting something that was super great, super fun and such. So that's what true play should do. True play is not going to do it. The same way Santa Monica Studios is not going to do it. The same way Respawn is not going to do it. They have too many people. They have too many people in order to do that. And they lack the will in order to do things properly. And whatever that looks like a make work project, an in-between project, or a something in order to like start doing that. So we can plan things right. So there's narrative in front of us, and we can plan that and do that right. And so that's the start. And then as each new feature request comes in, we can take this methodology and apply it to each new thing coming in. And we're going to stumble with it. And I don't know how new this is for Raul. I don't know how new this is for Zach, right? So we're going to stumble as we go along, but the trajectory should be towards we're getting closer and closer to doing things the way they should be done. Because that's where the happiness is. That's the promised land with the milk and the honey that Fred Brooks writes about. Is like basically, in a sense, stress-free software is kind of where you're trying to get. Yes, you come in, you work hard, you do your stuff during the day, but you're not stressed out about it because you have the right amount of time to do the things you need to do. Did the right amount of thinking, the right amount of planning, the right amount of design, and now you're implementing. Instead of what we were faced with, which is, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and I don't have any time to figure out how to do this, and I have to get it done because I need to get on to the next thing, right? I was miserable last year, and I think the rest of you were too. Some of the time, most of the time, all of the time, I don't know. So I will say at the end of the day, I've worked in a warehouse, in a factory. It's way better making games miserably than it is to be happy working in a factory. Now, that might just be me, but I've worked retail as well for like 2 years on my feet all day. I would much rather be sitting in this chair at a keyboard than be doing that. So even a bad day making games is still pretty good in my book. But we can have good days making games and make that the norm. And that's what we're trying to get to. So my fear in this, I didn't know how long it was going to take to go through all this. We're already at an hour and a half, but I'm going to keep going because it's important for true play. It's important for each one of us. If we stopped at this point, it would all be hugs and high fives around and everybody feel good for Friday, and then we go away, and then what would really come from it? So that's why I want to do this next thing. This next thing, now that people have gone to the washroom and they can concentrate because their teeth aren't swimming. So now we're going to look at what the heck are you talking about in terms of this designing and planning, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So here we go. Okay, so has everybody heard of UML and class diagrams?
Yep.
I can't see your screen if you
I know, I'm sure.
screen share. Okay. Yes.
I don't think so.
That's why we're doing this. Because I figured we're not all on the same page with these things. So share.
I don't remember what all the different lines and symbols always mean, but I do like recognize it and whatever.
Yeah. And just because you recognize the term and maybe you took a class, I don't know how well you paid attention to that class. I don't know how much you cared during that class. So this is called Star UML. And Star UML, trying to got this big bar going across my, oh, there we go. Now I can move the bar. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so Star UML is a design software design tool, and it's a software design tool, and it's better than most anything else that's out there. There might be some better things, I don't know, but this one is very, very good. So we'll put it that way. This one's very good. So, and it's free. It's open source. And how did it come to be open source? I'll tell you a little trivia because I want this meeting to go forever. So there's so IBM bought this company called Rational Rose, and Rational Rose is the place where they actually originally created the unified process because they had all the really smart thinkers all working at Rational. And so Rational came up with the RUP, Rational Unified Process, and they came up with UML. That's where UML came from, was from these Rational people. And so they have a bunch of things like activity diagrams and use case diagrams and class diagrams and sequence diagrams and all these ways of figuring out how software is supposed to work. And they created a tool, Rational created a tool called Rational Rose, and that tool was $1,500 a seat. And at Grocery Gateway, we had 3 floating seats for that thing. And so I got to be one of the people that got to use it. And I absolutely fell in love with it because I had been building software without even knowing there was a better way to make software, right? Like if you're coming in fresh and you just started working the way we were with TruePlay last year, you just figure that's the way things are done. Okay, whatever. Just like continue on. So you do that, and then all of a sudden come across something. It's like, no. You can plan things out. You can think things through, and you can actually figure things out without writing a single line of code. And you can have a nice, beautiful design and have your stuff figured out before you go to code. So that coding is actually just like writing lines in a text editor. Like you're not thinking anymore because you've already done your thinking. If we could get to that point, then that's like awesome and really easy. And writing code, as fast as you may be, is the most expensive part of your job. Okay? The thinking part, which you probably do not enough of, no offense, the thinking part is the fastest part of your job and therefore the cheapest thing to change. And that's the part we don't do enough of. And the expensive, slow part is what we spend too much time doing. So we need to reverse that and do, let's say, 60% thinking and 40% coding instead of 10% thinking and 90% coding. And what you end up with is better designed software so that you don't maybe have to go back and rewrite things. The refactoring is lower, the bugs are lower, the quality of software goes up, and all the associated costs come down. Okay, that's the holy grail. That's what we're trying to achieve. So this is a class diagram, and it's made in this thing called White Star UML. And White Star UML does all kinds of diagrams, but the class diagram is the one I want to talk about today. And so this is just a little something that I was working on. It doesn't even matter what it is, but what you can see from this is all of the classes that are involved in making this particular feature or this particular part of the game. And so what it's showing you is we have some kind of a map class, and it's made up of states, and states are made up of, it's called cities here, which are actually locations, because this line right here is an association. And this line is tracking the cities is a collection of locations. And this line, this means something. So everything in UML means something specific. So this not filled arrow means inheritance. And so we have a location which has a state, right? Sorry, I said that states have locations. No, locations have a state, and they have an X and a Y. And that's all it needs to have. And then we can inherit from location to have buildings, have units, and to have cities. Okay, and a city adds a whole bunch more things on top of what a location is. A building doesn't. It has a building size and a name of the building. So just from two things, a regular line and an arrow, unfilled arrow line, we already have described a lot of software in here. So what you do, this is just showing the data side of things. And so now I'm going to show you how you would make a class diagram for something. So I'm going to create a new, it's in the logical view. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to create a new class diagram. Okay, so I got a new class diagram. Cool. So I go out and I put in a class, and because this was made by, oh yeah, so Rational Rose, they made their software, $1,500 a seat, and a bunch of Koreans said, screw you, Rational, we can build your software open source. And they did, and they made it almost identical to Rational Rose and gave it away for free, and Rational doesn't even sell software anymore. So this thing, so when you create a new class, it puts in the Korean name of one of the developers randomly. That's why it's Hyunsu Kim and stuff. So I'm going to throw out something, and I've been thinking about narrative recently, so I'll just throw out the narrative. So we're going to have some kind of a script. That's going to be the big container for everything. Okay, so that's, even that is a decision that has been made. Like, there's going to be a script, and it's going to contain things. What does it contain? So that's what you do here. So I'm still on. Did I double click this thing? There we go. When you turn on the class thing, you go boop, 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 and it'll make a whole bunch of things when it's green like that. Yeah, and it just keeps popping out things. Anyways, go back to the select mode. Anyways, it just works like normal software. Okay, so I got my script, and now I'm going to put in my class, and the script is going to be made up of scenes. And so there's two little buttons here on the side. One is adding an attribute. An attribute is a field. It's a variable. It's a piece of data. Okay, so blue is data, and red, you can see it's got a little whoosh symbol on there, and red is a method. So I'm going to need to track something. And what am I going to put into a scene? A scene is going to be made up of, I guess I'll call them lines. Okay, so lines. So I guess, so just by doing that, I'm like, oh, I clearly need something for lines. Time to go and make a class for lines. Okay, so line. So what's on a line? Well, I can go in here. Oops. Here I can add attribute. Okay, I get this little thing up. So a line, it's going to have an ID, right? That's the thing we're familiar with. That's the ID for the localization. That's the ID for the VO file. Great. If I hit Control Enter, it goes right to making another attribute. And so what else do I need for a line? Probably I need a character. Okay, great. And then I need an emotion to go with that, because it's not just Ava. It's Ava when she's happy, Ava when she's sad, right? So great, I need an emotion, okay. What else do I need? I need the actual text. That would come actually from somewhere else, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Okay, so I got this thing of character, so that's gonna be important for our design, right? I can't reference something that doesn't exist yet, so fine, I'm gonna go add another class and character. And if you have seen the documentation, character has a color. Oh, but if I look at the documentation, they actually say sometimes I want to override the character color. So I go back here and I go override. So how do I show the associations between these things? That is by drawing the lines. And you see here, this is the association. So this is using character. And this script is an aggregate of scenes, and scenes is an aggregate of lines. Okay, so now anybody on the team should be able to read this and go, I know what's going on here. Like, even if it was drawn this way, okay, where like I'm no longer giving you a vertical kind of hint about how this thing is. You're like, oh, script contains scenes, scenes contain lines, and lines reference a character. Cool, I know what's going on. So what do I need to do with a script? Well, I don't actually have the scenes listed in here. So I'm going to go in and add the...
Thomas, can you back up and just go through the different types of associations and aggregations? Because I have a guess at what some of they are, but I'm not certain I have it right.
Okay, these are the only ones that I care about. So this diamond-shaped thing means it's an aggregate, right? Aggregate. And then the other one is for inheritance. So, oops. So I told you before, for generalization, I have to have a, I don't know, you have some kind of like, so this is a subclass of that. But
I still want more on the aggregate bit. Like, you say it's an aggregate, but I'm trying to piece down exactly what that means.
What is an aggregate?
Oh, an aggregate is a collection. It's a bunch of these things. So this means, and you can even define that where we can say this is a one. What is the? I forget now because it's been so many years. It's like one-to-one like that, and then you can say, okay, but this is a 1 to n. And so you can define the aggregate, but this is telling you a script has many scenes inside of it. Like, that's what this thing means. Whereas a line has one character. It's not, a line doesn't have a group of characters. It's not an aggregate of characters. It is just one character. It's an association. So when you look at, we talk about coupling and decoupling and loose coupling and whatever, like these lines are showing you what the coupling is that is within the system.
Just to make sure that I understand, a script can contain multiple lines, but you have a one-to-one there. Is that just? That was just. I guess I don't understand.
Well, I was just trying to show you that you can define you can define for the reader what the relationship here is, and when you're doing these things, you can say. It's either 0 or 1. And so like, oh, it's either null or it has a reference. Or it's impossible to be null, so there would never be a 0, and it's just n. So it's 1 to n for the number of relationships. So, okay?
Yep, that makes sense to me.
Okay, so the things that are important is you can draw these associations between your classes, and then these are references between each other, right? And so I'm going to get rid of my subclass. I don't need it. Okay, so what are some of the methods that these things would need to do? Well, I have a script. I need to play the script. Okay, fine. So I need to add a method to run the thing. Okay, so I don't know. Let's call it run. Great. Does it have any parameters? If it has any parameters, I can put them in right here, right now, right? And this is where you're thinking. You're not coding. You're thinking about what it is. Do I need to run? Like, what do I need to run? Is this going to be a static method and I feed in a script ID? Or is this going to be just, oh, I have an instance of script and I just call .run. I'm going to stick with that. So I call run. Great. This is a part where you can ask, do I need something like to check if a script is over? That probably makes sense. So, okay. This would be a property, but I'll just do it as a method. Okay, so is the thing over? And so you can, so I can look at this little class diagram that I have, and I can start to come up with all the functionality, right? I can look at what they're talking about in their design document, and I'd be like, okay, do I have a method that covers that? No, I don't. Okay, so here I can add a is line over. I can have at current line. I know all the things I'm coming up with could be properties. And I don't know, the end of the scene. So looking at documentation, they're like, hey, we want to do some kind of fade out or transition or something when the scene's over. Great. Like, so I need some kind of method that's going to call like, hey, scene, you're over. Is there something that you need to do? And then the corollary of that, of course, is like, hey, I need scene begin. So, then I have a hook that I can put into, right? So we haven't written any code yet, and we're already getting somewhere with how complex is this thing? How many methods do I have to write? How do they interrelate? Who's talking to who contains who? Okay, that's as far as I want to go with this. So the next step is, and I think my model has already been, yeah, okay. Okay, so I've done a first pass. I've done my inception level of pass. Do I have any data types on here? Nope. Do I have parameters for my methods? Nope. Don't care. Don't care at all. What I care about is, yeah, this will probably work. This is something that I can get code reviewed with somebody else, right? Because I'm like, they can look at the design document, then they can look at this, and you can have a meaningful conversation about that. And that conversation doesn't take 2 hours. That conversation can take 10 minutes by looking at it, because it's not overly complicated. I don't know if you thought I was going quickly or not, but this is the fastest possible way in creating methods and attributes, right? Like I can type pretty fast in Visual Studio. I've been using it many years, but I can't add attributes as quickly as this. Because I don't have to worry about defining things. I don't have to worry about compiler errors. There's like a lot of things I don't have to worry about. I'm just like, I'm coming up with a plan.
You're jamming, basically.
Jamming. That's right.
Jamming.
I would also probably argue that the bigger the project or bigger the task that you're doing, the more efficient this becomes.
Yes. Very good. Okay. So now I'm going to say, okay, so this has been approved. We talked through it. This is good. Now I'm going to go and get really specific with my design. So what is this ID number? Is it a string? Is it an integer? Like, what is this thing? So I can do that over here. So down in the properties, over here in the Model Explorer, I can see scenes, and I can look at each one of these things, and I can go, oh, this is the data type for this thing. I can type it in, or these are the classes that I could choose from, or I could use the built-in C# ones. So I'm going to say that this is a float. Okay, and so bam, it's got a float, and the same thing is true for the methods, the parameters for the methods, and this is not the fastest way. Oops. Yeah, here we go. So I can say I don't know, script, and then I don't know, an ID number. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just showing you, like, you can go in and you start defining what your things are, right? And so if the script is supposed to be calling the scene, and then I realize, wait a minute, how does script even know what the ID number is? And then I'm like, oops, I got to add a method, or I got to add another attribute, another field to the thing. And that's how you start to validate your thing. You're almost a compiler yourself. It's like validating this thing. Okay, so now that we've done that, then you can go to this and you can generate your code. Okay, so where is that thing? I just did it. There we go. So I'm going to generate my code, and I want to do it from the logical view, and it's asking me, okay, what are all the classes that you want to do? And I just want to do the scenes one, just to show you. So I go here, and then it asks you where do you want to stick it. I'm going to stick it in my temp folder. And then this part doesn't really matter. Absolutely tabs. Oh, it's tab as space. I don't want that. I want tabs. Okay, so then I hit next on that, and oh, why did it fail? I think it failed actually because I didn't define everything. Okay. I think it'll do it now. So C# generate code. This thing works with C++ and like any other language. Remembers that I want to do scene. Go to my temp folder. There we go. Okay, so now the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Do you want to see the code? Of course you want to see the code. That is the whole point of this thing, right? And so what I'm showing you with this code thing is that this is not like doing it in Visio or doing it on a sheet of paper, or doing it in PowerPoint, where it's like, it's lost. Like whatever you typed in is lost and you got to redo it. These tools are specifically designed for doing this, unlike Visio, so that you don't lose the work that you've already done. You've just worked in a faster way, and then you can go and look at it. So now I have to turn off my sharing for this. Stop that share and open up my scene file, and now I'm going to share that. Should be the right thing. Okay, so here it is. It didn't know what to do with lines because I never defined them. So lines, it just says object, and it didn't know, but it did know that there was a float for the ID. And I guess that was the only one that I defined. But anyways, if you put in bool and whatever into there, you don't have to, but now you have it. I don't know why I didn't do this, monsters. I think that's actually an option, yeah, in order to do that. And it'll put in errors that say not implemented and such for you. So this gives you a basis from which to start programming, right? Because you've already thought through, how should this be? How am I going to store my data? What am I going to work with? And now you're just coding it up. Like you have a template that you've already created. And so you're like, okay, that's all fine and good. It's actually built into Visual Studio. The Visual Studio thing is, in my opinion, not as good, but I don't really care if you do it in Visual Studio or you start a UML or a similar kind of tool. That part is not important to me. So we can go here into Visual Studio and we can do a similar sort of thing. So we can add a class, and what's the class? I'll call it a line. So now I have a line, and move your heads over. And so there's fields, and I could put in a field, which is the VO and the ID and the background, like whatever. And then I can define the data types for it here. And then forget how I add an association. I've used StarUML more than I've used this. But anyway, you can draw the association lines between these things. It's the exact same thing. So they built it into Visual Studio so you can do that and you don't have to click generate code anymore. More importantly, you can create class diagrams from your existing code base. So that is over in the Solution Explorer. So I go add new item and class diagram, and I add that, and then you can do it by dragging in things from the class view. So if I go here and I look at my classes that I'm interested in, it can also do the entire project, but it starts to get pretty crazy. So you can see the project. So this kind of thing, I don't know, Zach, if you knew this, but this might help you in understanding the code, just because, oops, I double clicked on it, so left the diagram. So it shows you the classes, and it'll show you the associations between them. It gives you an idea of like, what am I looking at, whatever, without the thing over on the side and trying to look for it. Okay, questions?
Does it make sense to standardize the tool that we're using? Like you're talking about Star UML is what you're using. And if we're all using the same thing, that probably has value. I will admit, one of the reasons I've never used UML in the past is because tools like Star UML just look terrible. And they feel very clunky to me. And I've never been able to find a solution. Not that I've looked hard, but I've never found something where I'm like, oh, this feels natural. And so like just looking at Star UML, I'm like, yeah, it does all the things I want. I can see the value of rapid iteration, but I don't know if I want to be looking at that screen for 5 hours. And maybe it's just, I just need like to change a couple color settings or something, or make it so remove some of the excess options, which I just don't care about.
Yeah.
But I don't know, there's a bit of me that really likes the ability to have something that looks nice when you're looking at it. And the Visual Studio doesn't look that much better. But the advantage there is then you could possibly go in the reverse and say, hey, here's an updated thing. So I made some changes in the code, and here's the new class diagram that was generated, to sort of just look at as a code review or say, hey, here's how it's changed. But I don't know. So
yeah, the Star UML was made in 2002, 2003. Maybe it looks that way to you. It's free, man. It's not $1,500 a seat. And it's so what happened with those Koreans, because nobody asked. So those Koreans were making better and better versions of the open source one. And one day they said, hey, maybe we should sell this. And so then they started selling it. And then they canceled the open source thing and took it off SourceForge. And so they became the enemy. They became Rational Rose and selling the thing for $100 a seat. So if you're going to use it, and if you like Star UML, okay, it's not White Star UML, but Star UML, it's $100 a seat. If you're going to use it, I'll pay the $100 a seat, and if that makes you happy, then that's great. Because the most important thing is that we are thinking through the designs of our software and showing them to others and getting feedback on it. Now, the advantage of the Visual Studio one is that as you make changes to the code, the diagram updates. The Star UML is essentially a one-way trip. Star UML will read your classes and it will update it. It's just convoluted, and I've never done that. I'm at the start of the project. I need a plan. I need to know what is the data structures, what are the manager class or whatever, what is it doing? How does it talk to the other classes? That's the part that I really need to get going, and that's what gets me going, right? So I'm like, I got a design, and now someone can go and implement it. And I am working on the narrative one, the class diagram of narrative, because I want to make sure that we've thought through everything before it's handed out to somebody to go. So there's a positive and negative there. The one is that you're not handed a task with nothing. You're handed a task with something. Now, I'm the one who spent the time thinking and planning through what are all the data components and whatever. Did I get them all? Probably not. But and now there's somebody has to implement it that hasn't thought about it before, and now they have to understand the diagram and whatever. But I think that's superior to just getting a JIRA task. You have a GDD, a JIRA task, and a class diagram of like, here's how the thing should be. And that you've asked in the past, hey, we have like this experienced programmer here with decades of programming experience, and he doesn't do any programming anymore. So I do know how to design up things. So a true technical architect way of like, hey, this is the right way to do this. Like this aggregates that, and this connects to here, and this inherits from there. That's the right way to do it. Go, and you can like fill it out, in more detail to the specifications that are needed.
I will also add that just because you're the person who knows how to do it the best, you're also the person who's doing a lot of other things.
Sure.
So trying to, I don't think you're going to be able to design up everything. And I don't think we'd want to. And the corollary to that is, honestly, the part I enjoy about coding is be thinking through those pieces. And so if I'm just taking a diagram and implementing it, I don't know if I want to program too much anymore after some point, because you start running into challenges. You start running into, there's changes, there's stuff that will be tweaked and revisited as it goes. But if all I care about is implementation, there's a bit of me where I don't care anymore.
So I may have overstated it. I'm saying that within 5 minutes, I can come up with, this is the right way to do this because of all my previous experiences and things that have failed and blown up and had to be patched and all that, right? So I'm talking about the 5-minute version of the class diagram to be like, it's very much a design pattern. Hey, here's the pattern, go.
I think maybe what I was trying to say and didn't say it was, maybe it's not so much you created a class for everything, as you're saying,
right? But
also like we then go in, we do our work in the editor as well. We're not doing it directly in Visual Studio, and then we move forward. It's not just one person designs and the one person codes, but an intermix.
No, not at all. No, you are all design coders, whether you like that title or not. Josh is still head of Party Blobs, but other than that, he's a design coder. So the whole reason I've been talking to you all this time is because I want you all to do design. That's it. So if somehow at the end I was like, oh, by the way, I'll do all the design, and here's your class diagrams, that is not what's happening at all. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, Inception, trying to wrap my head around the narrative thing. What are all the things that are necessary, and translating from Mark's document into something like a class diagram, which to us is more specific than Mark's document is, and that gives somebody a starting point. And if you start working on it, you throw out what I gave you, just let me know, because one of us sees the light. So if you're working on it and you're like, yeah, this thing I started with, Thomas, this sucks, then I would like to know that you're changing it and it sucked for such or such a reason, just to make sure, because the opposite could also happen, which is you didn't understand where I was trying to go with it, right? And you just threw it out willy-nilly because you didn't get it. So that's what I'm just trying to avoid.
Seems like it'd be a really useful thing too for us, just to like, if we're sketching out our own ideas and then we want to bounce off of somebody else, then you can just hand them the diagram and they can look at it and then kind of give you feedback on that. It seems like it'd be really, really useful as just a shorthand explanation without all of the other things that can be distracting in code.
Totally agree. And I'm not trying to eliminate conversations, but the GDD and your class diagram, it's kind of all I need to see, right? Like because I can read it, right? I can read both of those things. Again, not trying to avoid the conversation, but it goes a long way.
As a visual person, the UML is helpful for me because I can visualize what is usually abstract in a concrete way. And so it helps aid me in my mental model development of what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of makes more efficient that process of then taking this big macro idea and then doing all the little micro parts of it.
Rel or Thomas can correct me, but I remember Fred Brooks saying something about don't show me your code, show me your data. And that's pretty much all he needed. And it seems like this UML is sort of what he's talking about.
Yeah. There's lots of ways that UML is misused and a waste of time. I didn't bring up any of that. I didn't show you any of that, right? I showed you what I think would be very useful for all of us. Anybody learn anything today?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely learned some about UML. Because I'd heard about it before, but I hadn't actually seen like in practice, like this is how you would use it. So that was pretty cool. And I also like maybe in the future on a different session of this, after we've had some practice with it, it might be useful to know like how it goes wrong, because then we'd have some hands-on experience with it too and know like what the pitfalls are and what to avoid and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was wondering if I could kind of like, I guess, make a statement / ask a question before the final remarks sort of thing. And that is, I guess that when I see this, I can see how it'd be really useful, and it sort of scares me because I feel like I've heard of a lot of people get into analysis paralysis with it. And even mock up things that are sort of ridiculously simple. Like, for example, let's say that I'm like, okay, I need to make an object that is a counter and it counts up once a second. I don't really see the value of making a diagram for that.
You are correct.
So I guess that there's a bit of a fear of overuse, but also I've worked with you long enough that I know that that's not where you would actually lean. So I'm like, I know that you would lean to that, but I guess I'm sort of wondering, is this something that you're wanting us to, I can see for larger systems like the story system and such, that makes a lot of sense. That's a really good way to show, here's my thought process. And I've seen so much messy code, like on Ava right now, I'm restructuring a bunch of stuff. And this sort of thing would have been great to see the project start with, to avoid a lot of these problems where it's like, why is all this distributed this way? Or why is this not collected here? Or why is it not distributed this way? And why is it all collected here? Like there's these weird structural things. So do you want us to do these diagrams as a norm? Is it just sort of use our own common sense and be like, this is a big problem, we should do this, or big enough, I should say? What is kind of your goal for usage around this? Like, when do we use it?
Yeah, so I'll start with your concern about analysis paralysis and overusage. We're currently at 0%, so I don't see a lot of risk of us being at 100%. I think the risk is on being at 5% and 10% and not using it enough. I think that's the risk. But this is for things that matter. And you have to use common sense, and every one of you have been vetted for your common senselessness, and you passed. So I trust you to use common sense as to when you need to do this. So your counter example is clearly something that you wouldn't spend that on. The bling as a feature set would have really benefited from this. The game state, right? Michael spent a lot of time working on game state. It would have been helpful to have this kind of diagram, maybe bounce it off of Tyler, who's also been working on the project. Like there's like, it would have been really helpful for game state. I think about the control work that you did on Maple for making her run. I don't know what the class diagram would be for that. Like you just have to like code that up, right? So that's what I mean by the common sense. So this is for medium to large tasks and assignments. These are for things that have risk. These are for things there's a lot of options on how I can implement this. There's not a lot of options for implementing a counter. There's a lot of options for implementing how narrative can be. So when you have a lot of options, this is to help your thinking. Okay. What I love about doing UML, and we've only scratched the surface today. I've only shown you one thing. There's 7. And so next week we will cover sequence diagrams, because that is an awesome thing for helping your thinking. But class diagram is like just to get something down. You know, it's very easy in terms of data. These are some data. These are some methods that are going to be important. It's not all encompassing. It gives you a start, and then you go and then you actually do the work. That's why I was saying, like, to go back and update the UML, that's terrible. And that's the Mark Cerny, like, documentation is useless and all that, right? Like, I don't want to go back. So that's the advantage of using Visual Studio. In fact, in Visual Studio, you can't even stop it, right? Like, if I was to go into the project and create a class diagram from your classes, it's going to show it to me, whether you want me to or not. Whereas like with the star UML, you have to make the class diagram, and there's no way for me to just suddenly see it if you never ended up making it. So that's the answer, is for this is a tool for thinking. A whiteboard is a tool for thinking. I use Xmind as a tool for thinking. I use Word sometimes as a tool for thinking. I use Balsamic as a tool for thinking. You'd think I'd be better at thinking with all these tools. So this is a tool for thinking, and I also believe it's a valuable discipline. Of all the fads and all the things that have come out in software development, this is the right way, always. From Fred Brooks to today, that's 60 years. This is the best way to do things.
I think another component that makes this valuable is that we don't work in a silo, right?
Right.
We're not working in a void. We're working with other people. And being able to see your thought process zoomed out, right, is very valuable. If you need to work with somebody else and show them what your code does and what are the relationships, well, the UML lets us see that at a broad scope. And then we go in and kind of with the fine tooth brush, kind of go in and look through things and work with it.
Okay. Any questions or anything, or can we end it here? Because, you know, Sean has to watch the whole video, so I don't really want it to go longer.
Yeah, pretty well. Any question I have is just tool related, like
Yeah.
specific visual or whatever. So nothing really.
So in terms of standardizing, yeah, that would be great that we all use one tool. So I am one person who's used StarUML and Rational Rows, and I had to use Visio for a while, which was the worst. And I tried out Visual Studio today for the first time in prep for this. And it seems okay. The thing I don't like about Visual Studio is it forces you into having data types. And I feel like I just want to get it down. I just want to get down that I need a VO line, I need a color, I need a background, I need a whatever. Like I just want to get that down and worry about the data types later. And Visual Studio doesn't seem to allow that kind of speed. So that's why currently I lean towards that. I like Visual Studio because of the back and forth that, you know, at any time I can pull up the class diagram and I can go and be diagramming again, then go back to coding and then go back to diagramming. Like I really like that a lot. So maybe I'm wrong about having to put in the data types, but why don't you try both? White Star UML, it's free open source. Visual Studio, you already have it. So why don't you try both, and we can kind of come back in a week and go, okay, this is, you know, by popular vote, this is the one. Because I don't really care. I care that it's done. I don't really care what the tool is. So we'll see what if people have a preference.
The other big thing that comes to mind for me is that a lot of the stuff that we talked about was programmer specific, but some of it was more so process in the game development pipeline. Is there a section of this that we need to share with Ruby and James? Or, I mean, Raul posted the one video, which I've seen before, and it's great, from Mark Cerny, his DICE presentation. And so maybe it's just, hey, we make sure that that's in the list of videos that you watch when you join Defiance or something like that. But it seems like we need to catch Ruby and James a little bit up with what we talked about. And I don't know their experience with that.
So, yeah, I wasn't excluding Ruby. James, it's his fault. He's in Hawaii. So yeah, I recorded this, and one of the reasons I recorded it was for Sean, but also that there can be a CodeCraft channel and on the wiki, and I don't know how many of these there's going to be. I think there's going to be 30, 50 of them, and it can be a valuable resource as we continue to hire Tylers from TWU.